Good morning, everybody. Thank you to Volvo for having me here and to moderate, as well as giving a presentation in a little bit as well. So what I'd like to do is start off just by framing out the issues a little bit more based on the video that you just saw. So when we think about climate challenges in infrastructure construction, we look at the construction industry in particular. I think one thing that's striking is if you look at this graph here, it suggests that construction as an industry represents the third largest industry sector for greenhouse gas emissions in the United States. And as you heard on the video as well as in the introduction here, globally, that's 30% of greenhouse gas emissions. In particular, when we look at construction emissions, we're finding that 76% of construction emissions are from fossil fuel combustion. And so the Environmental Research and Education Foundation is an organization that furthers research in this area. One of our key research focuses is on emissions research. As was mentioned, the foundation has been focused on solid waste. You might think, what does that have to do with construction? But if you think about the various facilities that operate in the waste sector, recycling facilities, composting facilities, and landfills, I mean, landfills in essence are a ongoing 30-year construction project. The waste industry in particular is very equipment heavy. So that's kind of our intersection as an organization into the construction space. But as it relates to waste management in particular and what EREF does as an organization, we've grown to become, with the support of stakeholders like Volvo and others, to be the largest source of research funding and scholarships across North America for waste-related research. And so that's the space we operate in. One of our objectives is to track statistics like this to understand, where are we at when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions and how is that affecting the world we live in. So when we think about emissions, I want to tie this back to some fundamental concepts of why do we talk about greenhouse gas emissions. And so I bring up the idea of an environmental burden. Really our goal in anything we do today strategically, in my view, should be the perspective of making sure that we use the resources we need for today, but making sure that we preserve and allow for sufficient resources for the generations that come. And when we think about greenhouse gas generation, it's not a one-hour solution. In today's society where we all want immediate satisfaction from what we do, greenhouse gas generation, for example, contributes to climate change, global warming. That's a longer-term problem, but it's a problem that if we don't address immediately today and every day, it will become a real challenge for future generations to come. And so when we think about greenhouse gas generation, everything is connected to that. Mining the natural resources that are used for construction purposes result in fuel usage and energy usage that then contributes to greenhouse gas emissions. And then, of course, there's the idea of contaminants and toxicity that are released as part of those various operations. And so when that happens, you can imagine a situation where you could significantly slow or even halt construction or growth activities because you might have a polluted water source at a growing city location, which then becomes problematic for further growth and further progress. So just highlighting the interconnectivity between greenhouse gas generation and greenhouse gas emissions and the other factors that really come into play from a construction standpoint. So when we look at the subsector emissions, I think as a research organization, we're always looking for variables that might influence emissions as a whole, for example. And when you look at the construction subsector, you'll find that really there's no one major culprit. We're not talking about residential construction is the primary player that contributes to construction emissions. Really, it's across the board. In fact, if you look at specialty contractors, which would be bricklayers, masonry, things like that, as well as residential, highway, street, bridge, commercial, institutional, and the heavy civil work, really those are generally equal contributors to emissions as a whole. So this is not probably something that's foreign, right? Because we're talking about a situation where the majority of these emissions are coming from fossil fuel burning. So really coming more from equipment operation and things like that. So it should come as no surprise that we're seeing an equal contribution, generally speaking, across these various sectors. So bringing this back to a full circle, when we think about what the scope of the CCC is, we're really talking about a full life cycle analysis, a full life cycle perspective. It's not just about what happens at a single site, and when the site is complete, the building is constructed or what have you, that we walk away and think, okay, we're done. There are various factors that integrate into that, and we think about just the production of building materials, for example. That it starts there, really. Then going to the infrastructure and building that, the construction aspect of things. But once that's done, it doesn't stop there. Really, from an emission standpoint, we want to think about the utilization and maintenance of that space, of that site. Then going to when the site is reached the end of its life, what happens with demolition? Can we make decisions on the front end up here that then can translate to more sustainable practices at demolition? And then lastly, then that goes to how do we best reuse the materials and the scarce resources that exist today. I mean, it's one planet with a singular amount of resources, and so we can only consume so many of those resources before we reach a situation that becomes very critical.